Forge. Today, I welcome Matthew Askren. Matt is a Marine Corp Vet who got out in 2011 and began to follow his passion in the food industry. He is now a president and general manager at XLNT Bakeries, which is growing quickly and meeting customer demand. In his spare time, he is helping people achieve their dreams, coaching and mentoring by professional speaking, leadership blogging, and not only that, but he's also a proud father of two. So let's get into this. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Love it to be here.
So first off, would you mind showing the guest Lucy's Hoopie Pies, please?
I would be happy to. This is a chocolate hoopie pie. As I adjust for my camera, I apologize.
You're good.
But found in your open air and grab and go coolers in convenience stores near you, 7-Eleven, some of the Circle K's of the world, Rudders, lots of places. So Rebel, you name it, we're getting there. Soon to be Super Target next month, although the label will be different.
Oh, perfect. So you guys have, because I remember on that LinkedIn post that you guys recently expanded into Target. So that's great. That's great news. So congratulations to you, to the company, and more success in future endeavors. That's awesome.
Definitely appreciate it. Like everything, it's a process. With a group as big and dynamic and robust as Target, you definitely don't say, "Hey, this is us," and they say, "All right, go into all of our Super Targets in 3 days." We wish it would be that way. It makes for a great movie or TV show or book when you hear about that. But the truth is that the process, takes months and months, and you just got to chip away, and then you get to the point where you can launch, and that's when the fun begins.
And that is also life in more ways than one. So this is perfect. So again, the Meaning Forge all of this stuff is symbolically loaded with a bunch of different stuff. It's life. It's how you forge meaning, how you make it, find it, whatever that case is. And so just to kind of get us started off, if we were to kind of like the typical question is, tell us about yourself, Matt.
Well, I am, as you said, a proud father of two. I'm in North Carolina these days, although I've literally lived all around the world. I was fortunate enough to grow up in suburban Chicago, around a lot of different people, and able to really grow and develop culture and an understanding, I think, of a good way to live my life. I was 17 years old when I joined the Marine Corps. So as great as that area was, I didn't stay there too long. So, once I got into the Marine Corps, I was kind of jet setting around the globe, East Coast, West Coast, Okinawa, Japan, Afghanistan, everywhere in between. So cold weather training, hot weather training, desert, mountain, a little bit in between. Was able to forge relationships and really meet people that never would have had the chance to otherwise. One of the beautiful things, and I may be slightly skipping ahead here, but you'll have to forgive me in advance. But one of the great things about being the president of a young brand and of a young company is I'm on the road a lot, and when that happens, I'm always able to be somewhere where somebody that I served with lives or works or is also traveling, right? So it's not strange for me to be on a business trip and be able to grab coffee with somebody that I haven't seen in 12 years. And I really think that is a part of the beauty of this life that we live, that we can kind of weave what happened, when we were 19 years old and had no idea what life had in store for us with now when we have an established career in the private sector and families, and we can pick things up like we never left. And that's something that I'm really blessed and fortunate to be able to do. Unfortunately, I don't get home as often to the Chicago area as I'd like, but nonetheless, I travel all around the country, and in the Marine Corps, I was able to travel all around the world. My philosophy is that the Marine Corps took my management and leadership style, which was really originated from my parents and from the people influential in my life growing up, and they were really able to refine and define it further, giving me opportunities at a very young age to be able to kind of stretch my legs and exercise my leadership skills and fill my hunger for more experiences and more in terms of the skills in terms of life.
Yeah, that's what I love about the service, and I think a lot of people kind of get that I've met, and of course, like I advocate for it because I was in the Army. I was never ready for the Marines yet, but that's okay. Muscles are required. Intelligence not essential.
I'm going to improve that.
All that fun stuff. And on top of that, I was a paratrooper, so I mean, everybody's a dirty, nasty leg to me. So
I'm definitely a leg.
But the good news is, like, those are great experiences, and it's just it's so helpful. But before we talk a little bit about your like maybe in a significant event in the Marine Corps, what was a significant event that happened in Chicago that was forming for you?
Well, I would just say that the overall lifestyle and experiences that I was afforded from having great parents that cared about me. Nobody's parents are perfect, but being able to grow up and see two working parents, one an entrepreneur and one a union worker. So I really kind of got, in a lot of ways, the best of both worlds. I got to see a peek into what both lifestyles were. And, to be able to grow that way, I'm blessed to have an older sister and an older brother. And so I got to watch their experiences and see their journey a little bit. For better or for worse, I picked much different paths than both of them. However, it gave me at least the opportunity to see that before I did choose my path. And, pain retains. So I often have picked in my life the hard way instead of the smart way. I don't know that I would always recommend that to my own sons or to somebody that I might be coaching or mentoring. But it has proven useful to me.
That's an important way to look at it. Suffering, and again, like, some people equate suffering and pain as the same thing, and oddly enough, they're not actually. Suffering just means to bear. When the way you derive it, the history of the word. But typically, like, you suffer anytime you do something fun too. It's all a matter of perspective, and so it's super useful that you pushing outside of your comfort zone. I just see this weird thing. This kind of pop up right here is that relationship you mentioned. Your between the two parents, you had one that was an entrepreneur and one that was a union worker. How, and now you are an entrepreneur and you're also leading a company. What was like a major takeaway? Like what's been like a major resounding thing that comes from that? Do you think?
I think for me, it was the ability to see what happens, or the benefits of having kind of that stability that a union provides labor, and then seeing the potential freedom at times, although that freedom comes at a cost. The freedom and benefit of an entrepreneur. I certainly see why either or both would choose that world. And ironically, in my journey, I worked for 3 companies that were union as a manager. So I even got to see, and as a youth, I worked at a grocery store and I was a member of a union. So I've seen that predicament on all 360 degrees. And I believe that that's an important one in terms of kind of filling out what you think on what side of the ledger you're trying to be on, whether it's labor, whether it's management, or even whether it's running an entire operation. I think I've got a unique perspective on that, because I don't think there's a ton of people that you're going to talk to who have been on kind of every level, whether it be as a dependent or as an actual member of the workforce that can hit kind of each one of those boxes with a check.
Yeah, that is it is unique, and that's why, like, when you said it, I was like, that's a really different take. And as we kind of start to see this conversation unfold, I'm curious to see kind of how, like, where that goes in some regards, or like where that pops up again.
Well, I can tell you inherently that when I got out of the Marine Corps, I thought that whatever I did right when I got out, I was going to do for 30 years. And that's kind of that son of a union worker mentality, right? You know, my mother worked for AT&T and was a member of the union for 35 years. Started at the age of 15. You know, so I thought, as I got ventured into the private sector, that whatever I got into, that I would stay there for 30 years. You know, little did I know that I would have this hunger for more. And I figured out that one of the quickest ways to gain more opportunity was to expand your horizons and be willing to move to different places, be willing to take different opportunities, different roles, different companies, to in some ways strategically pick which company or which role I took, because I thought that it would give me a better story to tell in the future, or a better skill set to show in the future. You know, these are all components that I did not understand until I lived in.
My mind's firing already with this kind of this background stuff. And I just want to kind of shift gears now a little bit to the Marine Corps, right? And so, like, there's this underlying thing that's kind of starting to develop here. What was a significant event that kind of helped open your eyes to this hunger or this yearning that you have, or that's just in general and meaningful to you?
Well, I would say my first deployment. You know, I was fortunate enough to be selected to be part of an embedded training team, and I was on a very senior team. There was one guy junior to me. I'd have to go back and count the number of how many of us there were, but it was close to 20. But I was the second most junior person, being led by a colonel, and on the enlisted side, the senior guy was a sergeant major. But I mean, by and large, they were all careerists, meaning that they had all re-enlisted or re-enlisted multiple times. Many of the officers were field grade. Many of the enlisted were staff NCOs. So guys that were far and above my pay grade, my experience level. And so you've got to assimilate. You know, I was a corporal at the time, which is the bottom of the non-commissioned officer rank structure. And you know, I can act like a corporal, and I can kind of be an outlier, or I can act like a staff NCO or a field grade officer. And I say that within the context of, clearly I wasn't walking around like I was a field grade officer. That's a great way to get your hat handed to you. But I mean, in terms of a maturity and a thought process standpoint, I could either assimilate to that, or I could stay where I was and be left behind. And there was no way I was going to be left behind.
Agree. I love that mentality, and I always enjoy seeing people rise above expectations and meet expectations and then rise above it in many regards. Especially, like, they don't let the title hold them back or something like that. They just contribute, and that's awesome, because it just shows so many different things. And so you get out of the Marines, and what made you move? I guess stay in the Carolinas and start going to Charlotte.
Well, I didn't go to Charlotte actually until about a year and a half, 2 years ago, for the opportunity that I'm in now. I actually got out and went back home, you know, which was the Chicago area. And I was there for about 5 years. I was in California at the end of my time in the military. Went to Chicago area, you know, thought that I was going to franchise a 7-Eleven, got very deep into that process. We were still kind of recovering from the bubble bursting in 08, 09 when I got out. I mean, we were past that, but we were still feeling the effects. So the loan market for a franchise was just atrocious. Basically, I would have had to work for free for a year and basically for free for a second year. And at the time I was newly married. And, I really felt a duty to my wife to not put her or us into that position. So I had to pull the pin away from that, which at the time was what I felt a very tough decision, but the right decision. I did the thing that no guy getting out of the military wants to do. I went and got a job, not a career, a job. And I thought when I got into that it was selling flooring, working commission in a retail environment. I actually thought that there was a chance that could be a career because I had talked to them about management and things like that. And I got some lip service that we can do that, but it really wasn't an option because the business was not progressing at the time. So I worked a job for 9 months, and in the process looked for a career. And at some point I stumbled across the food business. Alpha Baking Company on the west side of Chicago was looking for a sanitation manager. They were looking for somebody that was hungry. Little did I know at the time, they were looking for somebody that would work for cheap. No disrespect, but I just didn't know that because I didn't know what right looked like in terms of a salary. I only knew what I had made previously and what I was making working my job. And so I jumped at that. I was able to be successful, was promoted a couple times. Again, still far under my monetary value. I worked very hard, worked when other people wouldn't, did things that other people couldn't or wouldn't. And what I saw was that I could stay with that company forever, and I could probably have a good career, or I could take these things that I was learning there, and because of the unique situation of where I worked and what I was willing to do and the positions they had put me in, I could essentially take what I had learned, which was wisdom beyond my years, and I could apply it for a bigger company with more opportunity or more technology. That's where it comes into kind of looking and saying, okay, what skill set can I put in my bucket that I'm not going to get here? I ended up with Tootsie Roll, which is obviously a much bigger company, much more established company, and I felt like it was going from the Flintstones to the Jetsons. And at Tootsie Roll, my first role there was running robotic palletizing. So went from this very manual process to this process with robots, and just continued to grow there. And ultimately, I left Tootsie Roll because my definition of opportunity and their definition of opportunity did not necessarily align. That happens, I think, at a lot of places. But I'm grateful for my time there. I learned a lot there. But again, looking for an opportunity to kind of stretch my legs and to grow into an executive. Moving on to Atlanta Bread Company, Bake One in Atlanta. Ultimately from there to Smithfield Foods, where I inevitably, or ultimately I should say, ran a pepperoni salami plant in New England.
Very nice. And then what conditions allowed you to strike out on your own this time?
Networking is the biggest part of that. So in that process, I also started to get my education, which was it was great in terms of the doors that it opened and what I was able to learn. It was very difficult in terms of doing that while having a demanding career and trying to be a family man. But thankfully, my family was very understanding, and I was able to go from no education to an MBA in about 3 years. And so that was important, but that opened up a lot of doors for me to allow for that. But in terms of being able to strike it out in terms of a non-traditional entrepreneurship, when I was in Atlanta, I saw some things going on at the company I was with that I wasn't real pleased with. And I started doing some research on something called search funds. I won't bore everybody with what it is, but I do recommend that, especially if you're young and you're looking at this, look into what a search fund is, look into searchfunder.com, because I know when I first heard of them, I thought they were too good to be true. Little did I know that 6 or so years later, here I'd be. My story is not a traditional search fund story, so I don't want to get anybody upset about that. But ultimately, I started networking with young entrepreneurs, with investors, the types of people that I never thought would take my calls. Occasionally, they would pick up the phone. And so I started laying the groundwork for that when I was in Atlanta. And the things that we looked into did not necessarily come to fruition. That's unfortunate, but it just wasn't meant to be. I believe that there's, some divine grace involved with that, because everything that glitters is in gold. And I maintained those relationships even while I was with Smithfield in New England. And eventually a deal came around that made sense. And the investors reached out to me and asked me if I would run the operation. And I did my due diligence, and my family, came down to the Charlotte area to make sure that it was somewhere that we felt we could be. And, I guess the rest is history. Little did I know when I made that decision that we would be running a startup during a pandemic. But you never know.
Hey, great companies have started in a lot worse, man. So I applaud anyone who goes out, even at the hardest times, sticks to their guns. Even if you enter the arena and fail, you're entering the arena, and that is more commendable than being a critic. I'm sorry. So congratulations to you and that. And one more question concerning a little bit of background here, but how has your family and your two kids helped you get to where you are today?
That is a great question, and I think a very pertinent one. When I worked for Alpha Baking, I had a young marriage, and I used to hear the vice president of operations there, Todd Thornberg, would talk to a lot of the young rising stars there, many of whom, like myself, were either married with no kids or weren't even married yet. And he would kind of say, if you really want to succeed, get married and have a kid. And I never understood the mentality. He would explain it, but it never really made sense. What he was saying was, you will feel a constant push and pull to succeed like you never have before. Because anytime you think about failing, you immediately think about how that will impact your wife and your kids. And as your kids are, I'm sure it's the same as they grow significantly older. But in my case, my kids are still relatively young, 5 and 8. And you look at these wonderful human beings who literally are totally reliant on you, and you say, well, I just can't fail them. And sometimes you go even a step further and say, not only can I not fail, but I need to come up with A, B, C, and D of what happens if that even becomes a possibility. And different personalities will layer A, B, and C differently. My layering A, B, and C have never been as a stair step down. They've always been as a stair step up.
Yep, that's awesome. And I feel you on that one. I think many people who are married and have kids will feel the same, because there's nothing like lighting a fire underneath you than having a kid and a wife, and I guess some of the disappointment of having to let them down or something like that. So it's always a good motivator.
Todd Thornberg at Alpha Baking Company, the vice president of operations, who has been a tremendous influence on my career. But if nothing else, he put that in my mind, and it has stuck with me all these years. He put a few other things in my mind that have stuck with me all these years, that brought value. But not only is he a tremendous success as a in the bread business, but he's a tremendous success in terms of giving young leaders some thought processes.
All right, perfect. So I think as we finish up wrapping up your narrative, I don't want to get the guy's name wrong. You said vice president of operations,
Todd Thornberg.
Thornberg. What were some other things that he had to say?
Well, he taught me very early on that if you treat the company's money as if it were your own money, the amount of opportunity that you'll have to use that money is endless. Mm-hmm. And I carried that with me at Tootsie Roll. I carried that with me, especially in Atlanta with Bake One, especially with Smithfield, and now running a startup. I really feel that. So very rarely have I ever been told, we would send you to this thing that will add value, this meeting, this conference, this trade show, but we just don't have the money for it. Not because money hasn't been tight at times in terms of budgets, but because that I will spend the money judiciously. There may be the time that I have to take clients out to go get a nice steak, but I don't get questioned on why I did that, because everybody knows that I'm the same guy who, when it's just me by myself, might live off Waffle House for 3 days. I might, if I'm flying with or staying in the same place as customers, we may stay at a really nice hotel. But when I'm by myself, I might be at the Duchess Inn in Texarkana.
That's wise advice in a lot of ways. What's one more thing you said?
Those two were big. Another big thing for him was making sure that you were making sure that people who didn't complain felt appreciated. So early on in my time there, I had some questions as to how I was doing, and he was not even my direct boss. I didn't ask them because I didn't want to seem needy. And he read my mind basically and came up to me one day and said, you never complain, so we don't always go and pat you on the behind, but we see what you're doing. And if he had not done that, I would have been fine. But him doing that gave me the reassurance, like, okay, this is exactly what I need to be doing. I not that I don't need to speak up from time to time, but you don't need to speak up every time that you're wondering how you're doing.
Yeah, I know that feeling. And that's a great thing, because we always spend our time on the bottom for some reason, and we never make the time to reward or just that confident, like, hey, I appreciate everything you're doing, keep it up.
And that was 1 minute. If I got every bit out of that I would have if I went up and been needy.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had been needy, I would have taken up an hour of both of our times.
Yep, agreed.
His recognition of the fact that, hey, here's kind of an outlier who's doing well but not complaining. He only had to spend a minute reassuring me.
Yep.
You look at it from a time, and believe me, he didn't have a lot of time. I didn't have a lot of time. That hour, had I been needy, would have cost both of us a lot in terms of an opportunity cost. But because of his recognition, we only had to spend a minute, and I got everything out of it I needed, and he got everything out of it he needed.
Exactly. And one of those major things that help make us, right? So like we're in the forge, right? Like you are now the blacksmith of time and stuff like that. You are forging away using the analogy I like to use is Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, right? All that lightning and stuff. It's great. And so you're bringing all these things together. You're starting to bring these materials together, and those three things, right? Get married, have a kid, reward, like compliment those people, and then hang on, I had it and then I lost it.
Spend the company's money as if it were your own.
Spend the company's money as if it was your own. Are major things that a personal relationship, a personal mentor, or something to that effect can really influence people with. And another thing that I'm kind of seeing here is the material you're kind of bringing here is hunger, right? And even then, there's some aspects of networking. There's some aspects of leadership. So what has been the most difficult part of making all those come together to who you are today?
Well, I would say the juggling. Because you can't, first of all, you can't do any of the stuff that I'm talking about without having a super understanding and loving family. Mm-hmm. Point blank, period, right? But there's no way that you can be building a career that at times requires you to work 7 days a week and 80 plus hours a week, while at the same time being a student, while at the same time trying your best to be a family person. family man or family woman without totally understanding. So that juggling, and it's not something that I've always succeeded on. Most typically, I've been a success on the professional side, and I've done my best to be a success on the personal side. But if I'm being totally objective, there have been times where balls have been dropped, not on purpose, but just they've been dropped. And the hardest part of that is even when you do your best at juggling, the truth is that we can't be everything to everybody.
How do you reconcile that idea that you can't be everything to everybody?
I reconcile it as being a reality,
mm-hmm.
and I think that's a start.
I would again agree with you. That is a start, because you can't.
I don't know that any of us have the finish, or if we do, we have the finish. When it's time for us to finish up one of those components, whether it be professional, personal, or anything on down the line. But it's recognizing that that's a reality, I think, is certainly a starting point and a building block.
What do you think is one of the most formative events in your life so far that really stick out in your mind?
Well, seeing my children born is a huge part of that, because mm-hmm. again, going back to Todd Thornberg's discussion, that has professional and economic and aspirational components to your life. If I never have, I'm being totally transparent here. If I never have kids, I may not ever have the yearning to ascend to what I've done. Not to say that I'm done yet by any means. I've got a long, hard road ahead of me, like every entrepreneur and every person running a non-traditional business. But the reality of the matter is, I maybe don't have that inspiration for that aspirational result. If I'm a single guy who lives in a 1-bedroom apartment somewhere, but because I want to provide for my family, because I want to put a life together that is extraordinary instead of ordinary. Mm-hmm. Seeing my children born is probably the first thing that comes to my mind. That may not be the answer that most people would think on a conversation based around business, but that in many ways really changed my overall mindset, maybe break the mold of my mindset.
But this is a conversation about life. I mean, at the end of the day. And
sure.
So business is a part of that. Family is a part of that. And any other things that are also a part of that. And so what do you think is what is your highest goal that you're aiming at, that you're kind of like trying to make yourself to achieve?
Well, I would say the highest goal is happiness for myself and for my family. Now, how you gain that, you need to attain security on the professional front. You need mm-hmm. to attain a level of satisfaction on both the personal and the professional side. There's I feel like everything that we do, or let me rephrase it, I'll personalize it. Everything that I do, I intend to be a building block or a stepping stone towards happiness and security for those that I love the most.
Perfect. And we're going to come back to that a little bit later on, because that's going to go right into the pen, I think, in a lot of ways. And so as you're bringing these things together, as you're bringing these things together, what has been one thing that you looked at and said, "Hey, I really don't want to add this in. Like, this is not something that I need in my life"?
Well, early on in my marriage, I gave up drinking, which a lot of people in the corporate world are afraid to do, because they're afraid of how it will look, they're afraid of what mm-hmm. questions will come. And I didn't. This is not meant derogatory in any way. I have no issue with drinking, both in terms of with other people drinking, and I did not have it like a drinking problem, and I empathize strongly for those that do. But I got into a marriage with a woman that never drank, and so I drank less. And then all of a sudden, I started to see that I was saving money by not drinking, which if you know anything about me, for the people that know me personally, I'm real big on not spending money. It's just my nature. You can probably blame or credit that to my parents. On top of that, I saw that I didn't need that as a social lubricant. And then from a corporate standpoint, when people would see me at work events and whatever, and I'd be the only guy not drinking, I'd be drinking club soda. People would be like, "Oh, I didn't really want to drink tonight either, but I felt like I had to." And they'd be like, "Does it give you any issues?" None. Doesn't give me any issues. Nobody cares. In the rare occasion that people do care, it was because they thought that I was judging them. So as they got to know me and they learned that I wasn't judging them, then they really didn't care. And in fact, in some ways, it made me stick out to people, because here's a guy that chooses not to drink just because he chooses not to drink, and is willing to make himself potentially make himself the object of scrutiny in the process. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind. That's probably not the only thing that comes to my mind, but that's definitely the first one.
Well, on the topic of drinking, like that's really great in more ways than one, because and then at the end of the day, you look like it, like you look like you don't drink, right? And there's lots of benefits to not drinking too. Some people choose to do it socially. I definitely just do it just for fun in some regards, but that's just me, right? So
that's how I was. When I drank, it was purely a social thing. It was a weekend thing. It was mostly when I was single. But as I got more information and as I got more experience, I said, that's not really necessary. And I was able to carry through with it.
So sometimes what happens is when you start bringing yourself together, you start to see like this thing kind of start to emerge, right? And so what has been something that you've noticed as you started to bring these ideas, like these notions of who you are together? And again, like some of these things are these, like your relationships with Todd Thornberg, your relationships with other people, because like there's more out there. Your relationship, your idea, I want to call it your idea, but your innate hunger almost. I would like to kind of maybe see if there's something there.
Well, I definitely think there is, and I think that innate hunger is something that, on some level, I've always recognized. And on some level, that's why I felt like I did very well in the military, because there's always this. It's not a formal roadmap, but there's always kind of this roadmap of understanding that there will always be an X rank, there will always be an X billet, how to do those things. And so I felt like I was able to do well there. I feel like that in certain ways, on the private sector, it's a more asymmetrical path. And in a lot of ways that benefited me, because I was able to create a little more, and I was able to satisfy that hunger in a different way, a more non-linear way, if you will. So that has always existed in me. I'm glad to have been able to fulfill it up to this point, and I'm sure that I'll have to continue to feed that beast on some level. Right now, the feeding that beast is by building and hopefully sustaining XLNT Bakeries and Lucy's Hoopie Pies, our new shelf-stable products, Lucy's Muffin Tops, Lucy's Bunts, Lucy's Boom Cakes. Grab them at Travel Centers of America, please. But I mean, there's a reality there. You have to know that exists, and once you know that it exists, I think it allows you to deal with it, to penetrate it in some ways. Again, A1 to all of this is having a supportive family. I can't imagine being in the place that I'm at without having that there. Because I can't imagine going through what you go through in that process professionally and coming home and having to drag that portion of your life into it as well. And that by no means that I've been perfect in my personal life or in my family life. But by having a supportive family, it allows you to push further than you ever dreamed you could have in your professional life.
So the sword, what is essentially the sword? This is the mode of being. This is action in more ways than one. You've already made yourself in the forge The sword is that allegory, is that symbol of you. Okay. And so you start to carry yourself around, how you carry yourself, how you accomplish the day-to-day tasks, how you get through these things, all are important. And there's one thing that's just nagging in the back of my mind. And you said you have this insatiable hunger, but here's the paradox, or like the kind of like the other side of the coin. But you're also incredibly frugal.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? How do you navigate that?
Well, a lot of it is because the insatiable hunger is not, for me at least, is not materialistic, or it's not about things. And I think it helps that I'm not chasing contentment.
I'm sorry, say that last part one more time.
I'm not chasing contentment.
Okay.
I'm not saying to myself that when I get this next opportunity, this next promotion, this next whatever, I'm not saying, okay, well, I'll be content then and I'll just stop. Because I think that's irrational. So because I've got a realistic viewpoint of who I am and of what I want, I think that while that hunger for more doesn't feel to many like frugality would run side by side with it, I feel like in many ways it does, if you look at it and realize that my hunger for more is not based on materials or based on things.
So if we were to clarify, like, what is that hunger? Like that hunger is that is the highest aim. That is to support your family. That is
to support my family, to have an opportunity to see my vision carried out, to be able to have a larger platform, not necessarily meaning like what we're doing right now in terms of like media platform, but have a larger platform to impact more people, more things, more concepts, with who I am and who my family is. My faith is a big part of all of this, right? And while I'm not somebody that necessarily that's the first thing I talk about with people, I've had multiple people in my life come up to me and say, "Hey, you're a person of faith, aren't you?" And I say, "I am." And they say, "Well, we can tell." And sometimes I follow that up by saying, does that mean that you're a person of faith? And sometimes the answer is yes, but oftentimes the answer is no, I'm not, but I can still tell.
Why do you think that is? What is it that people can see? Like, is it like not to use the metaphor anymore that I need to, but is it like a glint? Like what makes it, what makes people see faith in you, do you think?
That's a great question that I can't truly answer. I can speculate. My speculation would be in how I treat people. My speculation would be in my consistency, the fact that I'm able to avoid some of the highs and some of the lows, because I feel like there's a higher purpose than whatever I'm in the middle of. So I would like to think that's there. The integrity component. This is going to sound strange because I'm was in the Marine Corps for 7 years, but I really don't cuss that much. I think that probably is part of it, which is an adaptation in many ways. It started before I had kids, just because I felt like I didn't need that as a way of describing myself or as part of my vocabulary. Again, I don't want to put this off like I never cuss, but it's not for somebody that spent 2 enlistments in the Marine Corps. I cuss very little. And then, of course, an adaptation of having children. I never want my kids to walk around cussing and then somebody able to say, well, yeah, they heard their old man say that. They may have heard somebody say it. I can tell you up to this point in my life, other than the amount of times I can count on about one hand, it wasn't me.
What has been, I guess, one of the indicators that you're carrying your sword the right way?
The feedback that I've received from people that know my children, and that compliment, their mother and I on how they behave. And obviously she deserves, be truthful, she deserves more of the credit on that than I do. But I think that is 100% part of it. Having people, again, in many cases, people that I'm not even super close with that come up to me and like I said, ask me, basically tell me that they know that I'm a person of faith. I think that is a moment. Those have been moments where I can hang my hat. I've been able, since I got out of the military, I've worked for numerous companies, and I keep in contact with people from every one of them. And
That's
some
great.
of that is my doing, but some of that is their doing, right? And so obviously I'm doing something right. People from multiple companies ago, multiple cities ago, multiple industries ago want to maintain some sort of relationship with them.
I guess that's an interesting idea too to kind of dial in on a little bit. Is so you maintain relationships, and in many ways, I would probably extrapolate a little bit that you're giving away your metaphorical sword, or you're helping them maybe forge their own. What's been a major memory or a major event that's maybe kind of shown or alluded to something like that?
Well, an example could be with a former guest on your program, Alan Simmons.
Oh yes, Alan's a great guy.
Alan Simmons and Alan, by the way, if you haven't watched what he did on this exact podcast previously, or watch his own podcast, Purpose Pod, or whatever else. Alan and I were lived in the same barracks, but we only lived in the same barracks for a month. And he actually had me on the Purpose Pod at some point, and I was amazed. How did we? I never would have known that we only lived in the same barracks, were on the same base for a month, and here we are, 12, 13 years later. I'm doing his podcast. So again, that's an example of a relationship that that started off with just living in the same building for a month, and here we are today, still in touch.
What is the most rewarding part of carrying, I guess, your sword through life?
So far, I would tell you that I don't believe I've gotten to that point yet. I would like to think that the best is yet to come. But so far, it's been able to watch my children and to be able to see how they have grown. And again, they're young, so I'm not trying to make them out like they're got accepted to MIT last week. But just seeing them develop and grow, and knowing that I had a large portion in pouring into their lives. And I would say the next component would be watching people that I've aligned with, and watching how they've grown, and knowing not that I've even played a big part in that, but that I've had some portion in that, knowing that they've felt like they could reach out to me, or I could reach out to them, and we could grow together in terms of, hey, I got a question about this. I may call them, they may call me, and we're able to be thought partners, and then watch how that develops. There's a guy that I think you should consider having on this podcast named Jim Hermosi. Okay. He's also known on LinkedIn and Facebook as Don Carlos. But Jim Hermosi and I were in Afghanistan together 13 years ago. And Jim and I were having a conversation recently, as we often do. Very smart guy, one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, and I'm not exaggerating. You talk to him for a minute, you know that. But Jim and I were talking about just about how much we've grown over 13 years, both of us, and having one another to bounce that off of. Not daily, not weekly, but just having one another to bounce that off of, and how that has contributed to it. So being able to see the people around me succeed at levels that I never would have thought they would have, and maybe they never would have thought they would have, has been fantastic. So that would be the non-family side. On the family side, again, it's watching my children and seeing the way their teachers, our neighbors, their friends, parents, family, extended family members, how they react to our kids, and recognize that so far, they're growing up to be happy, healthy, well-adjusted, productive members of society.
So every interview for this, I get to kind of play with a little bit of this. And so this is there's kind of a different types of questions you can ask. There's like, 2,000 years from now, what do you want to be remembered by? 2,000 years from now, what's the one piece that you can find? Like some guys, digging up your house or something like that, some archaeologists, and it's like, this is the remain, like, what's the one trinket? But I think one of the things that I kind of want to allude to, like, kind of connecting the sword and the pen a little bit, because from a person of faith, right, we understand that the sword is the word is the word of God in many ways, is the word of the Spirit, or the Spirit in many regards, and so it writes on the heart of every man. So, what is the few things that you want written on the heart of every man after you're gone, man, woman, and child, at the end of the day?
Honesty, integrity, credibility, work ethic. I think that those all really, can be impressed upon anybody and have an impact. And there's so many more, but those are kind of ones that immediately come to my mind. Certainly, I think that if we aspire to leave a positive impact, even if it's a mild impact, but whatever mild impact that may be, to be positive and not negative on people, day in and day out, personally and professionally, I think that the world would be a better place.
When you are trying to leave your mark and stuff like that, and like focus on those, if you were to pick one that is the number one criteria, like the number one thing that feeds into all of them, what would it be?
Oh, I think that authenticity is, because if you're not authentic, so you not only this is a weird space for leaders. We all have to reconcile this. You not only have to be authentic so that you can impress good things upon people, but you not only have to be authentic to yourself, you have to be authentic enough that other people believe that you're authentic. And that's a real thing, because there's nothing worse than somebody who's being authentic to themselves, but everybody around them thinks they're full of hot air. Because how do you fix that?
It's hard, and I think we alluded to something earlier in the conversation. We can't please everybody, and that's a big thing. And so it's about, I would say, there's a lot of things there that we have to kind of consider. And how does building a tribe or building your network attribute to your legacy?
Well, I think it expands your reach for sure. And I also think that it allows you in many ways to plant your intellectual or your foundational seed further, right? So if I'm somebody who's interested in being authentic, and somebody who's interested in being honest, and somebody who's interested in having integrity, then clearly the more people that I'm able to affect with those things, the better the results will be.
So let's just use this as an example. So you're writing a book down of let's say of about Matthew. What is something that you would want in there to make sure that you are authentic? Like what's the telltale sign that this is authentic? Like, this is not forged, this is authentic.
The consistency, because time reveals. It's an old DeBarge song from the '80s. Time will reveal.
Okay.
My behavior being as similar as it is day in and day out. Not to say that I'm inflexible, but I'm just saying my general demeanor and behavior being as consistent as it is day in and day out, I believe proves my authenticity. I would like to think that people figure that out for me sooner than that, but ultimately that's what seals it.
And so on that note, because like the challenge here that I see is change, right? Because sometimes people change over time, and some people will go, oh, he changed right here. Like if you look at like historical documents or primary sources or something like that,
new information gives you new results.
And so how do you ensure that you're still coherently authentic, even though we expect to see people change?
I think acknowledging change. I used to think this. I currently think this.
Yep.
Here's why. I think when we deny that change exists, we ruin our own authenticity, which requires you to be relatively introspective, because you have to be able to acknowledge that at one point I felt different.
All right, Matt. So the crown. There is so much about this, and I really struggled putting together these things and this symbology to kind of bring about, how we make ourselves, how we act, how we share a legacy. But one of the underlying currents in that is the crown, right? Like leadership, leading yourself, leading others, and it is by far one of the hardest things to consider, because it's so universal in many ways. So, what do you think about? Let's first start with leading yourself and how that plays a part into everything that you are today.
I think that's the building block. If you can't lead yourself, how can you lead somebody else? And I think if you look at some of the least effective leaders in the world, that they started with their inability for themselves to be able to walk the walk.
Now, is that the Marine Corps talking? Because, like, I know in the military, we oftentimes talk about, like, you need to be disciplined. You need to
lead from the front.
Lead from the front. Not only that, but you also, like, I mean, there's a lot of things you have to do as like, there's a time to be a follower, there's a time to be a leader as well. And how do you distinguish between maybe you need to follow something or you need to lead?
Self-awareness, situational awareness. Those would be the biggest ones.
Okay.
But the best leaders are capable of being followers. If for no other reason, those of us that are people of faith believe that we have to follow a higher power.
Agreed. Yep, I agree with that. So on the self-leadership, self-discipline, that's the building block that leads, into leading, I would say, others, right? And I think we both agree with that in more ways than one. Now, when we talk about leading others, there's something that I really liked, which was, complimenting, take that moment to recognize someone. How do we avoid, because I know we kind of talked about briefly the other part of that, right? How do we avoid spending all of our time on those bottom performers or on the bottom people that and I want to clarify this very, very carefully, right? Because sometimes some people just don't match the culture. Sometimes people just don't match anything. And there are some people that you do have to invest time in. But when do you tell, like, hey, I'm done. I can't give any more resources to this?
I think that largely depends on, are we talking about professional environment or a personal environment? On a professional, yeah, it can be. And from a professional environment, many times we have things like an employee handbook or a union contract, and that spells it out pretty clear for us. And I think in those cases, you have to go with the doctrine that you're working with. In a personal standpoint, I think you've got to run a risk reward calculus. How much am I risking my own situation in order to do this? So I think that those are the kind of the first things that come into my mind. And then also, self-preservation plays a factor as well. We don't want ourselves to drown while trying to be a life preserver for something or someone else. So those are tough questions to ask. They require self-awareness. They require honesty. They require introspection. But those are my thoughts.
And so one of the other things too that when we talk about the crown and we talk about leadership, we talk about the burden of leadership and the burden, I would say also the burden of responsibility. And maybe I would just like to ask it's kind of an open-ended question a little bit, but how do you see that burden of responsibility and how you wield, like how heavy it is on the head?
Well, anything in life worth having requires work.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to have my children be happy, healthy, stable, fantastic, right? I better care about that. I better be willing to wear a heavy crown. I want my business to make a lot of money for me and for my investors. Better be willing to wear a heavy crown to do that. Better be willing to go gray young. too late, right? I already did that, but you get what I'm saying.
One of the things though that I find with the Crown is taking on responsibility for everything you know and everything you don't know. And again, another kind of open-ended question there. Like, how do you feel about taking on responsibility for the things you don't know?
It's part of being a leader. There's certain things, whether you're a prominent football coach or a politician or running a business, where part of your responsibility is to have enough institutional knowledge to understand what's going on. And if you don't, on some level, at some point, that does become your fault. That would become my fault at some point. So I'm not just talking about other people, but that is a component to it. That's why we have to invest. We have to invest our time, our energy, our effort into understanding what's around us and what's involved with that.
So would you say it's more of a failure in leadership and stuff like that, not having the discipline to confront the unknown, and then when you confront the unknown, to sit there and neglect it? Is that the failure?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And first of all, you have to start by seeking it out. Your best businesses are ones that seek out understanding where their flaws are. A SWOT analysis can work wonders done right.
I agreed. So in risk measurements or risk management, any number of those things are super helpful. And so Matt, thank you so much for coming onto the Meaning Forge. There's just a few things that I kind of wanted to kind of sum up with, and let me know if I'm off. So this conversation has been great in more ways than one. And what we've seen is someone who's from Chicago, who has almost the DNA of a union worker and this entrepreneurial spirit just merging into one person, pushing forward, taking the best of both worlds and understanding the worst of both, and really driving forward, creating opportunities. And you go off and you join the Marines. The Marine Corps kind of fosters this, I would almost say, like the leadership, the Crown. It kind of molds it a little bit. It kind of molds this self-responsibility, this underlying substance of hunger for you. And it disciplines it and puts it in, something that you can aim at. And it's only solidified, and it's Mr. Todd Thornberg, helping you understand like his big three things, right? Which is complimenting those, who are successful, or complimenting your teammates, treating the company's money like your own money, and then of course having a family to drive those things. I see that in a lot of ways is like the outside influence kind of coming in, and networking is huge as well, because connecting people, the way you act and carrying your sword is gravitating others to you in more ways than one. And then it is awesome to see that. And then as you start to kind of strike out on your own, you're just fueled by these things. And of course, life is only so far, right? And the wonderful thing about the Meaning Forge, and especially the symbology here, is we can also break it down into multiple different events. It can be micro in many ways, but also macro. And so leaving behind a legacy associated with authenticity, most importantly, which is not an uncommon theme across multiple different people who I've talked to. Being authentic is not easy. And then of course there's commitment, honor. I know that's a more Marine thing too, but there's a lot of other things, integrity, that are going into this that you want people to gravitate towards and to kind of write and share a little bit of that essence of yourself. And so I really appreciate our time today. And as we kind of start to wrap up, one of the things I want to ask is, what are the top 3 books that you would recommend for someone to read?
Good to Great would be number one, probably by a mile. I really like that. And then, as crazy as this is going to sound, because self-help books are huge, and we've all read 100 of them, but I keep going back to Rich Dad Poor Dad, which Jim Hermosi recommended to me, and I had already known it existed. But that would be number two. And then, so despite the fact that there's been all these new ones, I think that goes up. And then when I was a teenager, I read a book that really assisted me in my life and where I was at that space. And that was the seven Habits of the Highly Effective Teenager.
Oh, man.
So not the original book, not the 7 Habits, but the 7 Habits of a Highly Effective Teenager. So those would be my 3. And the irony there is none of those are current. I still read self-help books, and there's good ones, but those 3, which are all, I think, at least 20 years old, are the ones that I would pick.
That's great, and I love Stephen Covey's stuff too. I'm a huge fan.
His son wrote the book.
Yep. That I've seen it. I'm also familiar with Robert Kiyosaki's work. Rich Dad Poor Dad. That was I got the 4 Teens one when I was growing up. So that was super helpful for me. And again, I highly recommend that book as well. And then I have not heard of Good to Great until today. And I think in our pre-show kind of conversation, I just kind of want to sit there and just kind of take a moment, kind of harken back to some leadership stuff and developing people. But would you mind telling what you did as a plant manager with that book?
Yes, I actually bought the book, the hardcover book, and then the Cliff's Notes, essentially, that you can buy. That's a paperback. It's like 23 pages that sums up the book. I bought both copies for everybody on my leadership team, and then and gave both to everybody, so there'd be no judgment in terms of who wanted to read a 300-page book and who didn't. And then we discussed the short version. So again, there would be no way to judge any of the members that just wanted to read the quick one. But the themes were the same. They just handled them in a different manner.
Okay, perfect. So, Matt, it's been great. And as always on my show, I don't have the last word, right? So I don't give a schedule for things coming up or something like that. If you want to schedule, they can find it. It's upcoming videos or something to that effect. But thank you for taking the time to interview today. I would love for you to have the last word, your words of wisdoms or word of wisdom for anyone watching this video. And again, the idea here is this is a library for people to come to, and so they're going to come and they're going to find something from Matt that's going to be like, hey, here's Matt, and like here's his. If there's anything that you can take from this video or from just knowing Matt in general, here you go.
Well, for my last words, I would like to say that if you do the right things at the right time for the right reasons, I truly believe that it's all going to be okay. So one of the things that I struggled with at an early portion of my life was, if this happens, will things be okay? If that happens, will things be okay? If I go here, if I do that, if I swing and miss, will things be okay? And I've learned that as long as you do those right things at the right times for the right reasons, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment, things all work out. So those are my last words. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak them.